What is the anatomy of a MidJourney prompt? If you're wanting to make art in the AI space, a lot of the actual artistry involves your ability to create a prompt that gets the exact image that you want, or close enough that you can edit from the art generator. We're looking at MidJourney today. This is an episode in my MidJourney Master Class. A full playlist with all of the videos will be linked in the video description. And we're focusing on prompt crafting, the art of creating a good prompt that manipulates the AI engine of your choice to produce an amazing work of art that you are proud of, or that you want to then use to edit and incorporate in your other work. We're going to be focusing primarily on the anatomy of a prompt, what the different parts are, as well as the parameters and the arguments that you use to manipulate the rendering of the part. And then in the next episode, I'll show you some cool tools to actually help you with the more normal language wording to help you describe your prompt better, if that's, something you need help with. I do want to let you know I have my own art available, analogdreams.threadless.com. This came off a freaking VHS tape. I have my analog art as well as my AI generative art available on there and different merch. I'm still uploading pieces all the time, so check back regularly, or I will get a mailing list set up at some point. But go check that out. I spent an entire year basically trying to find the right place and the right way I wanted to do this, and I'm stoked to finally share it with you. Enjoy the masterclass. I can't wait to show you what you can do with these tools. Before we get into any of the other ideas, suggestions, tips that I have, I want you to experiment with aspect ratio. That is my number one tip. My number one tip for improving your prompts with MidJourney and even Stable Diffusion is to play with aspect ratio. Aspect ratio can have a significant impact on the look of the image that you get. And for an example of this, we're going to do two different things. We're going to do a kind of generic prompt. We're going to say a feudal Japanese hut in a dense, beautiful forest. And I'm going to leave it on default, but we're also going to copy the exact same prompt. And we're going to say --AR for aspect ratio. We'll talk about these in a moment. These are called arguments. And I'm going to do 8x10, which is like, a big full screen printed photo from the old film days. I know 8x10s are still used, but they're based on film standards. And we're going to send that off as well. Aspect ratio is the ratio of width to height of an image. A standard YouTube video, like what you're watching now, is 16:9. It is 16:9, 3840, 2160. There are other aspect ratios like 17:9, which is called DCI for 4K, which Netflix uses for a lot of their shows. There's 2:1, which a lot of YouTubers use to optimize for mobile. There's CinemaScope, or 2.4:1-ish, which is also called 21:9 ultra-wide. There's a lot of different ones. With MidJourney, you cannot use decimal places. So you can't do 2.4:1, but you can do 21:9 for ultra-wide. So there's a lot of different aspect ratios out there, lots of different things. You can research those yourself to figure out what you would kind of want, but I'm going to show you the impact that these have. So while it's generating our feudal Japanese hut in a beautiful dense forest, I have no clue why the first job isn't going. We're also going to do an image of a person. So I'm going to do something generic just for the sake of time. We're going to do portrait of a beautiful woman with green eyes and curly brown hair, anime style. And I'm going to do the same thing, AR of 2x3. And we're also going to have to rerun this first one because it's just not doing anything. It got stalled. Okay, in this case, our anime girl actually came out mostly the same in both, which I don't often see with pictures of people. But you can see here the default, which is a 1:1 aspect ratio, which means it's a perfect square instead of a rectangle. The width and the length are the same dimensions. That's what that one looks like. And then our 2x3, which is a standard camera aspect ratio, like a normal camera here, came out mostly the same, but you can see it's experimenting more with backgrounds and angles to be more like you're actually doing a proper photo shoot instead of just like a headshot. And so that can play a role. And then the same thing with our dense forest here. We get a significant upgrade in the verticality of how this forest is conveyed versus the 1:1 versions, which are going to focus more on the hut. Now this one, this top right one, still does a pretty good job of conveying that sense of scale of the woods. But the rest of them, for the most part, doesn't. Same thing with this one on the top right as well. So an aspect ratio is one of many arguments, which are basically added details you add to your prompt for MidJourney that you do with dash dash before you add the argument. And so there are a bunch of these that we're going to talk about here. And these help you kind of manipulate the image generation process. So your standard prompt is just cues and ideas that you want the AI to think about and then process to generate your image based upon. The arguments are more controlling the process of generation. And this brings us to kind of analyzing what the anatomy of a prompt looks like, because a prompt isn't just throwing some words in there, because we can do that. We can just hack away at some words and hope we can get what we want, but we can also provide a lot more influence and a lot more details to actually kind of help convey what we want our final image to look like to help control that. So the anatomy of a good, or at least including all the features, I guess, MidJourney prompt includes 3 things. The first thing is actually an image prompt. You can actually give MidJourney 1 or 2 images as sources to kind of reference and take inspiration from. It's not going to build upon these. You can't manipulate or edit images like DALL-E 2 can do, but what it can do is it can run those images through the same kind of what's called clip or classification process to figure out what and where things are, or analyze it for styles, and take that to apply inspiration to the prompt that you want to generate. And so you have to have a direct link to the image, but you can use 2, which is kind of interesting. I've seen mixed results where 2 images can kind of get pretty chaotic, but 1 is fairly useful. And actually, I've done this here. So for example, I was trying to see how obviously the limitation is still me and my prompt crafting, but I was trying to see how AI would do recreating this photograph. It's of a building tunnel effectively that was built in between these 2 buildings, but it was done so effectively with a shipping container. And so I was trying to prompt craft up a shipping container with windows stuck in the air between 2 contemporary tall office buildings. And obviously it just kind of built some office buildings out of shipping containers, which I get. I understand the idea. But I fed that as an image source first, which is why it put this s.mj.run link at the start. Same thing over here as I was trying to recreate this photo of flowers that I took a while back. A little nice macro shot. So I fed that as an image source so it knew a visual of what I was trying to get at, and then I described it. Now, I got what I thought was the right flower, and it drew something completely different flower-wise, but you can see it almost recreated the exact photo in terms of all of its vague elements. A branch with the flowers, bokeh depth of field, blue sky background, almost exactly what I fed it, just with different flowers and, slightly different angle. That's kind of impressive. So to do this, you just paste a link to the image at the start. So let's find something we want to reference. What do we want to reference? I'm just going to head to Google Images. This is not a copyright violation to use an image as a reference, by the way. People are going to freak out about that, but it's what everyone does. We're gonna look up Starcourt Mall from Stranger Things. Your URL box and make sure it ends in a .jpeg, PNG, whatever image extension, because sometimes websites will try to skip out on how Google Images works and won't give you an actual image link. So make sure that's there. So /imagine. Make sure you have the prompt part, paste that image first, and then start describing. So that's part 2. Part 1 was a reference image. Part 2 is your actual descriptive language, the prompting, the description of what you want the image to, or the AI to think about to generate your image. So we're actually going to use 2 image prompts for one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a secondary image here. We're going to open this one in a new tab. We're going to open this one in a new tab so we have both of them ready to go. So we're going to start with 1. So we pasted in our image, we hit space, and we're going to say a 1980s shopping mall, neon signs, reflective, glowy light, neon, cyberpunk, synthwave, Stranger Things, Starcourt Mall. We're going to say wide angle shot. We're going to say Octane Render. I'll tell you what all of these mean in just a minute. Unreal Engine. and we're not going to mess with the aspect ratios yet. So we've got a description, which is a 1980s shopping mall with all these extra terms. You can add in as many terms as you want here. Well, there's probably a limit, but you can add in a whole bunch of terms and descriptors to help describe what you're talking about, including other inspiration. So you can see I started out with like an actual like grammatically correct description, but then I just started tacking on extra words because those are things I wanted to consider or to utilize in the image generation process. So we've got neon, cyberpunk, synthwave. Those are themes and visuals that it can reference to integrate into the image that it creates. Got Stranger Things, just as a pop culture reference. It can reference things if it was included in the training data, which it was. It included a lot of mainstream stuff. Got Starcourt Mall, in case it knows exactly what that is. Wide angle is just a descriptor of what kind of photo that I wanted to emulate. And then Octane Render. Octane Render is a type of renderer used in 3D work. And so it can actually reference these types of render engines in the stylization that it uses to generate these images. So I use Octane and Unreal Engine just for some photorealistic stuff. So this prompt has two elements so far: the reference image and then the plain text descriptor. We're going to hit enter. We're also going to do one with two images so we can see the difference. So imagine we're going to, you can actually just copy these s.mj.run links if you want to do that if you're using the same one. But I'm going to come over here and just copy both of these directly, and we're going to use two images now instead of one. That one is a link of nonsense. We can't use that one. That's why I said to check on it first. Let's find another one. We're going to use this. It's not the same thing. Copy image address, make sure it's something coherent. It is. Paste the link and continue our descriptor here. We're going to copy paste that as well and let that one generate. You can see here we actually got fairly similar images for both. That one even tried writing out Starcourt, but obviously didn't do so well. That one looks very close. That one's pretty cool as well. We got fairly similar images using both as reference, but you can see this one tried to kind of recreate the inside a little bit here. But it did a fairly good job in terms of vagueness. We didn't give it, enough to generate a photorealistic scene, but in generating a kind of 3D render engine style graphic, did a very close job by feeding it a reference engine image, recreating the kind of idea that Starcourt image brings to mind in your head. Now let's take a look. That was the first part of the image. Let's take a look at that plain text description a little bit more closely, because there is an entire world of terms and descriptors that you can include. And for that, I'm going to point you to two links in the description below. All right, the first link I'm going to point you to is MidJourney's own documentation, of course. This is their Imagine parameters illustrated. But I'm also going to link you to someone else's GitHub page that actually details a lot of references for keywords, styles, using the different MidJourney images for comparisons and things like that, so you can get a more visual guide. Before we mess with the official documentation, we should actually play around with the stuff on the GitHub. This from Will Wolfkin. They have a Ko-fi account if you want to support them for their work here, as I'm going to be doing, because holy balls, the stuff that they're putting out here is super useful. But they have a lot of documentation set up in the wiki format so that you can dive through and see how things are affected. So we're going to be using MidJourney v3. That's the version that they're running now. I personally see no advantage to using the older versions, but you can do that if you want. We're just going to be looking at version 3. And so you've got parameters, writing, as well as cross-analysis stuff. We're just going to focus on prompt writing right now. And we're actually going to focus on this section, the stylistic information, first and foremost. So you've got themes, artists that you can reference, drawing and art mediums, lighting, post-production, dimensionality, TV shows, all sorts of stuff. We're going to dive through some of this. I'm going to let you kind of explore a lot of it on your own as you want to get through, but I'm going to give you like a brief run through of everything so that you know what you can play with here. So with themes, you have 3 different sections here. And this has illustrations of the stuff that you can reference. So you get an immediate, like, these are the impacts it can have on my design. So, and they just have it all with different spheres and things like that. So retro is going to be more kind of 1960s, 1970s, blues and greens, almost wood grainy look, whereas retro wave is going to be more of that synth wave, cityscape, neon grid kind of thing. And you can see here, they have a bunch of different styles, including future funk, which is pretty rad. We're going to play with a couple of these in a minute, but you can see here they have a ton of different styles that you can reference, and you can use these in your description. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So we're going to do outer space. So you can see here, there's a bunch of different things you can reference for space that have slightly different impacts on how it draws your character. So something I've been working on is my concept for, if I can scroll back to it, some sort of space emperor. So we're going to type imagine. And then there's all these different like descriptors for space things. Quasar is a very specific thing. We've got a magnetar. We've got a black hole. We've got wormholes. So I'm going to leverage a celestial emperor who rules the cosmos, starry galaxy background. And actually, before we put background, I'm going to put another one that is a supernova behind him. Supernova behind. We're going to say with a supernova behind him. Starry galaxy background. That's probably all we can shove in there. We also got planets that we can reference as well. I don't think we need to reference specific planets. But then we can pull in some styles. So that is the descriptor. And we can go ahead and just kind of export that out. So we can see what that looks like. So that is just, these are themes, not styles. So these are themes that you can reference. So these are sci-fi themes, you can do holiday themes, etc. Then there's design styles. So you can do simple, basic, detailed, hyper detailed, intricate, complex, and all of these affect the level of details that you get in what you're working with. So multiplex gets kind of things built on top of each other. Intricate's going to do more ornate things or like patterns. You've got confusing, which is going to be just inconsistent, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of different things there. Maximalist has a bunch of different like textures and patterns and things like that. And then you have even things like ukiyo-e flat design, which is going to do more Japanese print style stuff maybe. You can reference specific decades as design factors. So I often use, of course, a lot of 1980s and 1990s style designs, but you can do Y2K stuff as well, even 2020s. And then you have different like actual art styles like Cubism, Expressionism, psychedelic stuff. You can try to do kind of fractally informed, designs, things like that, which is pretty rad. And then, of course, there are digital categories, which we'll talk about in just a second after we check on our Emperor. Ooh! We're getting something completely different here. So that one's looking pretty good. You can see we got the supernova in the background. Points for creativity, but I don't know what's happening there. I love the star crown. Maybe we can borrow that in one of our designs. Looks like he's being absorbed into a black hole there. So I'm liking 1 and 2. So I'm going to tell those to upscale while we're working. But now we can also influence this with one of the designs. So we can come over here and say we want... What kind of design do we want? We want 80s design. So we'll come over here. We'll copy our whole command. A celestial emperor, blah, 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 blah. / imagine. Actually, do we want 80s? Maybe we want... We're going to do 1970s. So we're going to paste all this in. 1970S for 1970s sci-fi. And we're also going to add in some other things. So you can, obviously some of these are going to override or conflict with each other, so you can't use all of these in tandem. There's like cool glitch effects, things like that. Obviously, if you're using a specific kind of flat art design like the 1970s one, that's not going to work. But let's say we want, I don't know, one of these cool designs here. We're going to do a glitchy one. There's also game system graphics, so we can reference specific consoles. I have tried referencing like PlayStation 2 and stuff like that. It does not work. It seems to only reference some of these older ones, although Xbox 360 is in there. So we're going to do one for PS1 graphics, and we're also going to throw in with data bending. So we're going to do 1970s sci-fi. I'm going to copy this whole command. We're going to send that off. I'm going to do a new one. And instead of 1970s sci-fi, we're going to do PlayStation 1 graphics with data bending. Is that what we wanted? Yeah. Okay, we have to say some of the wording on this is specific. So we're going to say with PS1 graphics, I'm going to fire that one off. And you can see here, separate from how you describe what you want to describe, you can feed all of these extra things in. And that's kind of why I'm starting with these out of this, because everyone kind of gets the idea of just telling the computer what you want, just like you tell a person what you want. But there is some quirks to that too that we will talk about as we go. And actually part 2 of this will be using a bunch of extra tools that help you write the plain text descriptors a little bit more better. Whereas with this one, I kind of want to focus on the stylistic characteristics. So here's our one with 1970s sci-fi. And you can see here it's doing a lot more like flat, old school sci-fi looks. I'm loving that one. That one's kind of unique. Actually, I'm loving all of these. They're not done yet, though. Actually, these did just finish. All right, we're going to upscale all 4 so we can look at it. I know that's wasteful, but I like doing it. And then we're about to get our data binding one in just a sec. Here's our upscales of the galaxy involvement ones. You can see here it's like just like his eyes are in his hair, and then you got the little mustache and stuff. But I feel like I could borrow most of this and the crown to blend in with another element like this. Like maybe I don't like the Nova behind this guy as much. I can kind of blend some of that together, give him the goatee maybe. Lots of possibilities there. And then our PS1 graphics, I love this. It's going for the like old school cutscene kind of vibe, so it's a little blurrier, it's a little hard to read, and the data binding kind of blends things together. But look at that second one right there. And even these are looking like some funky cinematic stuff. So I'm gonna upscale 2 and 3, and do a variant on 1. And you can see the process we're kind of going through here. And it's upscaling this one. That's looking kind of comic booky as well. There's not going to be enough detail in there for it to really recover, but still some cool ideas to start out with. So those were the themes and design styles. You can also reference other artists, which is pretty rad. Now, of course, you can reference the styles themselves, or you can just say that a piece is painted by or drawn by or whatever a specific artist. So what if you got, this has references for all sorts of artists. So this is why this is a massive resource for any AI art tool, because a lot of them will be able to reference these kinds of artists. And so I can come in here and reference like a manga style. So I can do Haru Toriyama. I think that's supposed to be Akira Toriyama. Maybe I should submit an edit. That's who, drew Dragon Ball Z and things like that. We're going to do Angus McKee just for the sake of it. So we're going to come in here. We're going to use we're not going to use the 90s sci-fi. We're going to use the one we started with up here, because that one was turning out pretty solid. /imagine. We're going to copy our prompt of a celestial emperor who rules the cosmos with the supernova behind him. Sorry, galaxy background. And then we're going to paste in painted by Angus McKee. We're going to see how that affects it. But you have all sorts of artists that you can reference here from all sorts of styles and mediums, and you can just tell them that it's made by that. And they even have like Instagram reference artists in here as well. So like, holy balls. We're going to do this one as well. So I don't know why I keep copying the add-on before I copy our command. So I'm going to do imagine, blah, 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 except we're going to do art by uan.visuals. We're going to fire that one off. And you can combine a lot of these. So obviously, different styles, as I mentioned, will override each other. And so if I say a 1970s sci-fi with art by Uan Visuals, those are going to be kind of conflicting because these are very different styles. And so you got to be clever with how you can combine them, but you can also be creative in how you combine them to get very unique results. Now, the examples, by the way, I want to show you now. We've just been looking at spheres. You can also compare them based on landscape views. So if we pull up, say, psychedelic, it'll show how it impacts, say, a landscape. Or you can say just the style itself and pull one up, and it's going to do just like a generic painting by some of these artists, which is pretty rad. It helps you really visualize what's going on. And that's the power of just the wiki that they've kind of built here. All right, here's our painted by Angus McKee in the kind of comic booky cartoon style. This is pretty rad. This definitely looks like an old school like 90s cartoon or like comic book art style. I'm loving the concepts behind some of these. Getting away from what I'm after, but like these are pretty unique pieces. I could see a lot of potential in those. And then this is the art by Uan Visuals. And you can see we have a lot more of that neon kind of super contrasty and lit scenes. And some of these are pretty rad as well. So you can kind of see the impact that it has. We're getting very different styles here depending on the things that we put in. Like, that is freaking dope. This one still didn't turn out super great because it lost all the detail in the face and there's no hands, but you know, you start combining elements and you get some pretty rad stuff. I love just the VHS look almost to that painting. Lots of creative stuff there, but we got so much. There's artists, there's drawing and art mediums, and so obviously you can have things be drawn in specific means, and of course, again, you gotta find the right combination to get exactly what you want, but it shows you examples of the different mediums themselves. You've got materials that you can add in. So you've got like liquids and solids and gases and powders. Takes a minute for some of these to add in, but it shows you examples of those and how you can integrate those into your pieces, including material options. You can add in reflections and roughness and matteness. You can really just describe exactly the scene that you want. You can also do lighting. Now, I will say, you're not going to get exactly the lighting that you want. So if you're trying to like craft a scene and you're like, I want a key light here and a rim light over here and whatever, you're going to kind of get like a vague idea of the type of light you specify, but don't expect the exact specific thing. But like crepuscular rays, God rays, as they're often called, we can add those in. So I can say, we're going to go back up here. And we're going to add in with crepuscular rays. And we're also going to say, referencing the game engine section that we saw before, Octane Render, Unreal Engine, and then level of detail that we looked at a minute ago, hyper realistic. Now I'm going to take a look here, see if there's any other things that we want to reference. So this is lighting. We've got colors, so you can specify kind of color stuff. That gets a little funky because you have to start weighting the image to get colors where you want it to. We'll talk about that in a moment. But then you've got entire color palettes, so you can specify color palettes. So I can say neon. That's one I use a lot. Polychromatic colors, light mode versus dark mode, those kinds of things. You've got post-processing shaders. So you can do ray tracing, ambient occlusion, anti-aliasing, digitally enhanced, and all of these will have an impact on what you're looking at. So I can say CGI. You've got stylization with chromatic aberration, anaglyphs, stereoscope, scan lines, edge detection, interlaced moire patterns. Obviously, these aren't going to stay super consistent. That's kind of a downside of AI. And if you want to add things like scan lines or chromatic aberration, RGB separation, those kinds of things, add those in post. But you do have options here to kind of play with. Then you can start affecting like how it looks based on the screen. So surprisingly, 4K, 8K, 16K, blah, 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 does actually have an impact on the like way it conveys detail, which I find super weird because it's obviously not generating 4K, 8K imagery. But we can say 32K. It just feels so dumb. You can control the aspect ratio by describing it here, and that's going to affect how it renders things, not the actual aspect ratio of the image. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. You can do like, 8-bit, those kinds of things. Again, it's not going to adhere perfectly to pixel art. We're going to look at that in just a sec, but you can play with it. So we're going to send this off with a whole bunch of descriptors for like styles and things like that. And we're going to take a look at what that looks like. All right, and here is our super CGI engine rendered ultimate like crazy lighting mode render, and these look absolutely incredible, but they're also kind of getting away. It's starting to lose kind of what I wanted it to reference, because this one doesn't even have a space emperor at all, and that helps transition us towards the third part of the prompt anatomy, and that is the parameters, the arguments. And I'm going to tell these to upscale while we talk about those. So the third part of your text prompt analogy are parameters that are added with 2 dashes before a couple letters, and then usually a number or something like that. And there's a lot that you can play with. So first, there's aspect ratio, which is --AR. You may notice that all of these specific images I've been rendering, I've been doing with a --AR 8x10 or 8:10 at the end of it, because I want more of like a long, tall kind of portrait style photo. rather than the 1x1 square. This is an advantage that MidJourney has over something like DALL-E 2, which can only generate 1x1 square images. MidJourney can generate most aspect ratios. Now, you can't do decimal places in your aspect ratio. So, for example, your standard movie widescreen CinemaScope is 2.4-ish to 1. You can't do that, but you can do the rough equivalent of 21:9 and still mostly get there. And so, again, that's --AR. And you can either do it as short numbers, which is just the reduced ratio of like 3:2 for a standard photo, 16:9 for a normal widescreen computer image, or you can do effectively the actual resolution. Man, these are turning out amazing. Again, we lost some detail there, though. So I would mostly use these for the backgrounds and then put the other Space Emperors kind of in there. Although this one, if we don't want a head and just want to do like a silhouette, it's turning out rad too. Look at that. All right, anyway, we're getting distracted. So, for example, if we want to do this same scene, we can do --AR. We can either do 16:9 or 1920:1080. Now, it's not going to make a 1920x1080 image. Keep that in mind. You cannot control the actual resolution, and it still makes mostly low-res images. At the time of recording, they did just add a beta upscaler that goes even higher resolution, but you can always upscale later in post. We'll have a whole video covering that, both for mobile and for desktop. But I'm going to fire this off with 1920x1080, which is effective, which is 16:9, if I remember to actually do the /imagine part. We're going to let that render. Now, I will say right off the bat, this does not illustrate it very well, but aspect ratio has the biggest impact on changing the composition of your render out of everything except obviously what you described the image to be. And this is actually going to be illustrated by what we're rendering here. So again, I was choosing an 8:10 aspect ratio to be like a full screen old school film print of a photo. And we're getting a big kind of portrait or movie poster-ish epic scene. But the same prompt, literally the same prompt fed through a 16:9 aspect ratio is getting more of like a video shot, a movie shot, more of like, you know, what you would see filming a movie or a game or something like that. And then if I do it again, we will fire off the same prompt, but I will do an aspect ratio of just the default, so I won't even include it at all. We can see we get something else. But here, we get some cool stuff. But it's maybe not what I was going for when I'm imagining just like a portrait that I want to print on a t-shirt, for example, of a Space Emperor. And that's another reason you may want to play with aspect ratios too, is a square aspect ratio is great for posting to social media or maybe cutting out a resource of, but it's not great for much else. If you want to include it in a video or use it as a wallpaper, you're going to need 16:9, 17:9, 21:9, or if you want mobile wallpaper, 9:16 or 1:2. But if you want to use it for t-shirts, then you want something closer to 8:10, 8.5:11, which you just have to do 8:11 or 9:11. And that will also change the composition, but it'll also help you get towards the goal of what you wanted. Because like something like this is cool, but it's not necessarily what I'd want to put on a t-shirt because of the way it's composed. And with photography, with art in general, composition is incredibly important. And so the fact that you can use the aspect ratio to help guide your composition more towards what you want is pretty cool. So you can see here with 1:1, we get something very different in that it's even experimenting with like close-up shots versus wide shots versus, I don't even know what's happening there. Like very drastic images across the three aspect ratios that we've played with here. Now, as mentioned, you can actually use --V1 and 2 to use the older versions of MidJourney. You can also do this with settings. So let's talk about settings for a minute. There's a lot of extra commands aside from Imagine in the Discord bot. So if I type /, you can see here it's already pulling up some, but there's even more than that. And obviously it'll pull up based on other bots or Discord things you have going on in a specific server. But we can say /settings, and it will pull up a whole bunch of things that we can actually change that we'll use as default for our images. So for example, this is mostly set up on default, other than my private mode access. So by default, you're using the latest MidJourney version 3, which is going to be the best for most things. And then your stylization, which is just, we'll talk about it in a moment, but it's just how much it like tries to go hard on the stylizing and, you know, dressing up of your images. You've got quality rendering. So again, you can do higher quality renders. It costs more of your credits, your points. So by default, it's set to base quality, but you can actually, if you're a paid member, you can set it to half quality by default and just have all your renders use less credits. You've got fast versus relax mode. Relax mode you have as a paid member unlimited uses of, but they take a very long time to render. So you can maybe switch it to relax mode if you fire off some before bed when you just have some late night thoughts you want to see rendered out the next day. Fast mode is what I use by default. And then you have the different upscalers. So there's regular upscaler, which is going to add more details into the render of the image itself. You have light upscale, which is just going to take it and blow it up. And then there's the new beta upscale, which I'll probably have a whole separate video on, but it's basically like light upscale, where it just kind of, it's a normal traditional upscaler that makes things bigger, but doesn't add in more details, but it does still affect the image a little bit. So you can change all these settings right here for your defaults. And that's also where you can change your MidJourney version. So just for an example, I don't want to risk leaving this on, but with MidJourney version 1 and stylization, we're going to leave it on medium. Only my biggest prompt crafting tip beyond the aspect ratio is to only change one variable at a time. So we're going to say imagine, and we're going to do the exact same prompt, but using the first version of MidJourney. There is also --HG. A lot of people don't use this anymore. It's kind of better if you want like physically larger objects or generating like a bigger scene, but the compositions kind of fall apart. This is actually a really good example of that, because one of MidJourney, especially the older versions, like biggest flaws is that it starts adding things that would be in a scene where they don't go. For example, trees and like power lines or power poles on city scenes and things like that. It'll just start injecting them everywhere, and it's not ideal. I honestly don't recommend using that. But then you have things like no. So you can try to say no plants, and it would try to remove the plants. And this actually affects into the image weighting, which we can cover. But I don't always have the best results for this. Like I tried doing a movie poster with -- no text, and it still did text. So your results may vary. Looks like we're still getting kind of consistent examples. I think the final render here will be a little less impressive looking, but I'm actually surprised at how that turned out. I'm going to let it finish rendering, and then I will switch back. Okay, exact same prompt, but with MidJourney version 1. Yeah, it's very different. I don't really have a good way of showing it. Maybe the other thing will in a minute, but that's fine. You can also tell it to stop at a percentage. So if you're trying to, if you want something that's like blown out, fake bokeh depth of field, you can stop it at 50% and it'll just be a blurry mess. What I've seen people use this for is saying to stop at 90% when doing portraits, character faces, because it will help preserve the eyes a bit better, because as it does the last like 10% of details on the eyes, that's where they get kind of destroyed. You can experiment with that. And then if you add --uplight, that's the same as coming in here to your settings and just doing light upscale. You can see here, it will just, all these do is just add a extra suffix, those arguments, by default to every prompt you type in without you having to do it, which is a bit of a time saver, but all it does is just use the light upscaler. And you can see here, the regular one adds in more details, whereas the light one just upscales. So pretty neat there. We have seeds. We're not going to talk about seeds just yet. We're going to go over here to the other parameters in this GitHub document to show some of the differences, because you also have Stylize. Stylize is a fun one. By default, I believe it's 2,500. Am I remembering right? Is this gonna, yeah, Stylize. Default is 2,500. So this is how much of a stylization based on whatever style you give it or whatever style it decides to go with, it uses. So 2,500 is the default. As you go up, and you can go all the way up to 60,000 now, it will just completely like override a lot of what you say or suggest or what you might expect with. Okay, so using a more customized prompt, here is our original render of our Space Emperor in the cosmos with all the crazy lighting and render engines. This is default stylization of 2,500. About what you'd expect, given what we've seen so far. This is with Stylize 625. So much less of the engine things. It's still rendering in the engine, but isn't going over the top with it, although that one is getting there. But it's also kind of losing what we were after. That almost looks like that's a face in the cloud. This is with 10,000, so it's going even more over the top, and we've completely lost our guy, although that one's there. But we get some really cool looking space scenes, and then 60,000 completely runs away with it, and we're just getting some hyper stylized space scene now, and the Emperor's nowhere to be seen. I think that's a better illustration. Now, Stylize is one of what I call the big three of arguments or parameters that have a significant impact on your image in terms of the final render. It is Stylize, quality, and chaos, as dramatic as that might sound. So Stylize affects the stylization. It's kind of a bit of an intangible because it doesn't always have a huge impact. Quality is literally how long the AI kind of sits with the idea, thinks about it, so to speak, and tries to render something out. And then chaos is just randomness, and you can do a 0 to 100%. We're going to go through these, and actually there's some cross-reference docs in this Google document, so you can see a scale of quality. So you can see here 0.25. Oh, we're going to like zoom in on this. Okay. 0.25 is going to be very much more abstract, much less realistic, probably a lot less close to what you were describing. Whereas, you know, yeah, quality 5 is going to get more photorealistic, a lot more details, things like that. This is also cross-referenced with the stylize factor. So if we scroll all the way down here to 60,000, with less quality, we're very abstract here. And then with more quality, we're still hyper-stylized, but have a lot more of those details. So quality is about details and trying to get much more accurate to your prompt. And so you probably want to live somewhere in the middle. I use quality 2 a lot. 1 is the default. But if you want more simple or abstract things, using half quality or quarter quality is going to be better. And that also means that you get less credit impact on your renders. That one's turning out kind of cool. Now here's one with chaos. Chaos, again, adds more randomness. So you do -- chaos at the end of it, as you see here, and then it adds in more random elements. So you can see here with little stylization and 0 chaos, this is what it looks like. That kind of scene. And all these are made with the same seed, by the way, which is just the same base image. And then we add in a bunch of chaos, and it really just starts adding in random details or ideas to the image. It still starts with what you gave it, but you can see here, if we go from 60,000 style and 100% randomness, like, it's just making whatever. That's a pretty cool scene, but it's probably not what you were after originally. And it just ends up in, those are cool though. It ends up in all sorts of other places. So pretty interesting to play with that. And of course, you also have chaos versus quality, and there you can start getting some really crazy details, but they might be details you don't want, so then you'll have to play around with the like light scale and things like that. But if we do like 25% chaos, then you get like, it's basically there to help you add in some extra originality or spice if you don't feel that you have the exact prompt that you want. So if we do our Celestial Emperor prompt, I really liked the stylized 10,000, and then I want to do quality 2 for it to think on it a little bit longer, and then we're going to do chaos 75. We're going to see what that comes up with. It's going to take a lot longer to think about it and to render it, but then it's going to come up with something pretty wild, potentially. I didn't do an aspect ratio there, so we're still going to be square, but that's fine for the example. I also wanted to mention, while that's rendering, you can also do -- wallpaper at the end, although I've had it tell me this doesn't work sometimes, and it's going to kind of brighten up the image, which is kind of weird. I think I can do a comparison of this. So if we do our Celestial Emperor without the stylization or whatever, we'll do a normal one at 16:9, and then we're going to do the same thing with -- wallpaper. All right, you can see here by doing a high stylization rate and a fairly high chaos rate, we get something unique and interesting, but it really just kind of ran away from what we were describing, which is fun. If you want to explore the art rabbit hole and come up with new ideas, then you can tweak from there. It's a lot of fun. But if you're trying to craft something specific, maybe not. I love this little like angel wing orb, but clearly it developed a feathery theme that I didn't input and just kind of went with that. But I love that 4th one as well. So it can do some kind of cool stuff. Now, you can see here, wallpaper came up with something way different. Now, it's really exciting. I love where this is going. But with the normal 16:9 aspect ratio, it's still trying to generate something that's like a video frame, a movie still, something cinematic-ish, and fill that frame, which is pretty interesting. These definitely look like movie stills. But the wallpaper is just trying to make something dramatic and usually brighter. This is hard to convey since it clearly just generated something very different. But like, luminance levels on average tend to be a lot brighter on the wallpaper, and it tries to be more like colorful and punchy. So we definitely got some fascinating results with the wallpaper. So it's something you can play with too. Even if you're not specifically trying to make wallpapers, you have that option too. But you can see here, by using the wallpaper command, it still made it a 16:9 aspect ratio without me specifying that. So pretty interesting as well. All right, we have 2 more final argument parameter things to discuss that can affect things as well as impact your image prompts, which are pretty weird. The first is image weighting, and the second is seeds. Both kind of tie in together. So image weighting is how you start to tweak your prompts to actually get what you're after. So you can see some of the things we have struggled with our Celestial Emperor dude here is some of the prompts have gotten away from the Emperor at all. Like it's getting the supernovas, the galaxies, all of that, but it lost my dude that I'm trying to render, the Emperor himself. And that's where image weighting can help. Now you can image weight the specific text that you put in the prompt as well as a source image. And we haven't done one with a source image, but I'm going to do an example of that here. We're going to pull up some sort of reference image of a space emperor. I don't know what we're going to come up with about what you'd expect. Not much, but, you know, that's a dude we can reference. And so I can fire our prompt off with that. /imagine. And again, your image prompts go at the front. Make sure it's an actual reference to an image itself. So chop off the rest of that. And then we'll copy paste our prompt here. I'm not going to do a aspect ratio right now. So we're going to fire that one off with just the image prompt as inspiration, but then you can also weight that image prompt. So --IW sets prompt to the weight. The default is it only considers it 25% of the way. And so you can go all the way up to 1. Now this will not iterate on the image itself like DALL-E can kind of do. It still just uses it for inspiration or reference or structure, but you can go up there. Now I said go all the way up to 1. You can't actually go past 1 with weighting so that it just overweights it. So we're going to do, the default's 0.25. We're going to do a 1 and then a 5. So we fired that one off. And again, you can just copy the link that it gives you here, the s.mj.run without recopying the image URL, which is really handy for iterating. And we're going to do IW1. So it really considers that because clearly it's still not rendering anything that looks like that image. And then we're going to do IW5. And we're going to take a look at those differences. All right, image weight of 1, we start to get more of an emperor focus in our images, as you can see here, which is pretty cool. Dig whatever's going on in that one. But then with an image weight of 5, it's purely just like, okay, you clearly want an image that looks like this, and it's going to focus in on an old dude emperor, and we're getting something way different than the rest. Pretty impressive how that plays into it. Now, you can also weight the specific text you give it. So we're going to go without an image prompt this time, but we're going to weight the individual descriptors that we have typed out. So an emperor who rules the cosmos, you got to be careful with where you put it, but you do. So we're going to say a celestial emperor. We're going to do 2 colons after the word emperor, and we're going to do 2 because it's a weight, again, I believe a scale of 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. Because it's a scale of 0 to 2. And that GitHub that I'll have linked below has a descriptor of this. You can see here, it has the prompt is sphere, cube. And so as it goes up in sphere, it's more spherical. As it goes up in cube, it's more cubical. And then as it goes to both of them, it tries to blend the two. So Celestial Emperor 2, Starry Galaxy Background 1, Crepuscular Ways 1, and Octane Render. Well, we'll just do all those to start. And then we'll do the same thing, but we'll say /imagine. We're going to say 0.25 for the Emperor, and we're going to say 2 for the Supernova. And that kind of plays into what parts of your words have to be more emphasized. But of course, if you get really wordy and descriptively, figuring out where to put your weighting gets kind of confusing. So you really got to play with it. You can see here we're already getting a fairly bit of a different image here than what we've gotten before because we started rating things or weighting things a little different. Obviously, it's most easy to convey with these simple prompts, which is why I'm still referencing the GitHub instead of purely my own examples, but hey. All right, so here's the image with a lot of weight given to the Emperor himself. So he's kind of, prominent in most of the images. But then this is with the Emperor having less than 1 weight, and instead the supernova is the priority. And now we're getting some wild supernova stuff. Gets pretty cool. So that's image weighting. You can weight and control the emphasis on your specific descriptors or your reference image. And those can all have powerful impacts. But then there's also seeds. So every image that you generate in MidJourney has a seed, which is a random text. It's kind of like if you've ever played Minecraft, you can do world seeds, and then if you do the same seed over and over, you get the same world for the most part. MidJourney can't recreate the same image over and over. Something like Stable Diffusion can. MidJourney cannot at this point in time, but it can still use mostly the same thinking process to get similar. So for example, to get the seed I showed you before, if you react with the envelope image, it will DM you the seed and some information about that run. And so now we have the MidJourney bot DMing us. We have a seed, we have job ID, and videos of the progress. Although those never work for me. I know they're supposed to. I don't know why they don't. And then you can jump to wherever the message is in Discord. So I'm going to copy the seed. And again, you add this as a parameter to the end of your description. So we're going to say -- seed, that text string. I'm going to copy paste, because if you run the same command over and over, you're going to get slightly different results. Whereas the seed is going to give you much more similar results. We're going to paste in our text before the seed, not at the end of the seed. So it's the exact same as this most recent prompt we just generated. Fire it off with the same seed. Now you can see here, we don't get the exact same images across all 4 from the first to the second run with the same seed, but it's very close. This is effectively kind of similar to the reroll button, but keeping it very strong. Now, if you get the seed of an individual image after you've upscaled, for example, so if we come down here, when have I upscaled? This one. If I do envelope for that one, and we copy this prompt, so we do /imagine. I can't spell anymore. Paste that prompt in. We come in here, we get the seed for this specific image, not the grid of the 4 images, but this specific one that we've upscaled. You can then do -- same seed. Instead of just seed, same seed, and paste the text. And what this will do is it will generate all 4 images in the grid based on the seed of that one image. So they end up looking very similar, and we can see what that looks like. So all 4 images should look like this dude up here with the halo supernova above him. And you can already see from the blur, we're getting very similar looking images because it's starting with the exact same framework to generate all 4 images. All right, and here you can see we don't have the exact same image because, again, MidJourney isn't going to do that for you, but it's taking the same visual structure and ideas and trying to make a similar looking image to that seed, which is really powerful. So this has been a super long and in-depth video. I will have time codes to all the sections, so you have the chapter markers on YouTube in the description, so you can skip to where you want to go, come back to it, reference later, take your time, play with it, and have fun. That's the whole point. Enjoy it. Don't get stressed out. Hopefully this helps you kind of craft your images. Most of this is focused around like the left and the right of the anatomy of the prompt, where you're crafting around your description, because I assume that you have an idea that you want to see the AI make, and you need help crafting the exact image that you want. If you're having trouble getting the right words to actually describe your image in that middle section of your prompt sandwich, then I have the next episode in this course is going to point you to some resources to help you craft the text part of your prompt most effectively. So you have the style guides that are referenced in the GitHub. If you need that, obviously, like, go use that. You have lots of stuff there. But if you need help just writing it out, you want something that's going to help write it for you, that is what the next episode in this course will be. So I hope you get subscribed. Go check it out. Playlist link will be in the description below so that it stays updated as I upload these videos. And if you want to check out my work, analogdreams.threadless.com, or join us on Discord, discord.gg/eposvox, to play with the bot yourself in a less crowded environment, and so on. Let me know your questions in the comments below, and happy creating. Remember to be kind. Rewind.